No one expected the mountain to go silent that night. One moment, the Brown home was full of noise and routine, then suddenly, everything stopped. A single sound tore through the house, freezing everyone in place. It wasn't an animal, it wasn't the weather, it was something far worse. Because on February 7th, 2021, Billy Brown's final moments hit without warning, no time to prepare, no chance to save him. What happened inside that house threw the family into chaos, exposed how dangerous their isolation truly was, and unfolded faster than anyone could react. These weren't just the last minutes of a TV figure, they were the final moments of a man whose body suddenly gave out while his family watched in shock. And the terrifying part is, nothing about that night went the way it should have. The truth of what happened has never aired, but it reveals more than anyone expected. Long before that final night, the signs were already there, quiet, subtle, and easy to brush aside if you wanted to believe everything was fine. Billy's breathing had become noticeably heavier, his steps slower, and the spark in his voice dimmer. Family members saw him pausing mid-conversation to catch his breath, leaning against walls when he thought no one was looking, and rubbing his chest during long days outside. The doctors had warned him that the strain on his heart and the recurring seizure episodes were getting worse, and that his body wasn't keeping up with the harsh lifestyle he insisted on living. Even simple tasks left him exhausted, but Billy never admitted how bad it felt. He pushed through every episode, convinced he could outwork whatever was happening inside him. To him, slowing down meant giving up, and he wasn't ready for that. But choosing to ignore those symptoms didn't make them disappear. It turned them into a ticking clock, one only he could hear, and one no one around him realized was already counting down. The warning shot came years earlier, in 2018, when Billy suffered a violent seizure that shook everyone on the property and even stunned the camera crew filming nearby. It wasn't a mild episode. His body locked up, his breathing faltered, and the fear on his family's faces said everything. Doctors were blunt afterward. His system was under extreme strain, and continuing the same pace could trigger another episode at any moment. They urged him to slow down, limit physical activity, and stay closer to medical help. That incident should have been the turning point, the moment the family insisted on a safer routine. But Billy, stubborn as ever, pushed the recommendations aside and convinced everyone he was strong enough to handle it. The show moved forward, the family returned to their routines, and life carried on as if that terrifying moment was just a bad day. In reality, it was the clearest sign yet that the next episode wouldn't be as forgiving. Despite everything the doctors warned him about, Billy refused to leave the mountain because it represented the life he had spent decades fighting to build. He believed that stepping away from that rugged isolation meant surrendering the identity he had created for his family, and he was determined to protect it at any cost. The wide open land, the quiet nights, the freedom from city noise, he saw all of it as part of who he was, not just where he lived. But staying there came with a brutal price. Very little access to emergency care, long travel times for medics, and communication dead zones that made calling for help unpredictable. His family tried to persuade him to relocate to a safer spot, but Billy wouldn't hear it. He insisted the mountain kept him alive, even as his health steadily declined. And with every day he stayed there, the gap between him and the medical support he needed grew wider, setting the stage for a moment when help would come far too late. As the months passed, Billy's decline became impossible to miss, even though he tried to hide it behind his usual jokes and stubborn confidence. His breaths grew shorter after simple walks, his hands trembled when he lifted tools, and there were days when he looked drained before the sun had even risen. Family members noticed him pausing more often, gripping railings for balance, and zoning out mid-conversation as if his mind was fighting to stay focused. Filming days became harder. He would step aside to catch his breath, pretending he just needed a moment, but those moments were happening more frequently. The high altitude and cold air on the mountain added even more pressure on his heart and lungs, turning every physical task into a quiet battle he refused to acknowledge. Instead of improving, his strength gradually faded, leaving him more vulnerable than anyone realized, and pushing him closer to a breaking point no one wanted to imagine. The night before everything fell apart, Billy wasn't himself. He moved slower than usual, struggled with short breaths, and kept pressing his hand against his chest as if trying to calm something deep inside. He looked pale, drained, and unfocused, but he brushed off every concern with the same line he always used: "I'm fine, just tired." The family assumed it was exhaustion from a long day. He had pushed himself hard despite feeling off since morning. At dinner, he barely touched his food, choosing instead to sit quietly while everyone talked around him. Even then, he refused to call a doctor or rest properly, insisting he'd be better by morning. None of them knew that this would be the last time they saw him upright, the final quiet moment before everything spiraled into chaos. While the family settled in for the night, believing he only needed sleep, Billy's body was already heading toward a point of no return. Everything unraveled in seconds. Early the next day, a sudden crash echoed through the house, and by the time the family rushed into the room, Billy was already on the ground, unresponsive and locked in a violent medical episode they had feared for years but hoped would never return. Panic hit instantly. Voices overlapped, someone shouted for help, and another tried to keep him still while his body fought against itself. In that remote mountain home, every second felt heavier, and the reality of how far they were from proper medical care became terrifyingly clear. Bear sprinted for his phone, desperately trying to get a signal strong enough to reach 911, while the others stayed beside Billy, calling his name, begging him to hold on. The house that was usually filled with noise and routine suddenly became a scene of chaos and confusion. They had always known their isolation could turn dangerous, but not like this, not so fast, and not when their father needed immediate help. In those final moments, Billy's body was overwhelmed before anyone had a chance to pull him back. A sudden surge in his system triggered a severe medical collapse, cutting off his breathing and sending his heart into dangerous instability. People who experience episodes like this often go through a rapid loss of awareness, as oxygen levels drop and the body shuts down faster than the mind can process. For Billy, it meant slipping into unconsciousness within moments. No pain, no time to react, just a sudden disconnect that even the strongest person couldn't fight through. His family kept calling his name, but the episode had already taken control, leaving him unable to respond. Experts say that when an event like this hits with such intensity, the person drifts away quickly, unaware of the panic around them. And that's what happened here. Billy didn't struggle or fight back. He faded before the full weight of the emergency even reached him, leaving his family to face the chaos he could no longer see. By the time the medics finally reached the mountain home, the family had already been through what felt like an eternity of fear and helplessness. The moment the emergency team rushed through the door, Ami and the kids stepped back with a mix of hope and dread, watching anxiously as professionals took over the scene that had consumed them minutes earlier. The room fell into a painful silence, no shouting, no chaos now, just the sound of medical commands and equipment snapping open. The Browns huddled together, eyes locked on every movement, praying for a sign that he could still come back. But as the medics worked, their expressions began to shift, the urgency in their motions fading into a quiet seriousness that said more than words ever could. When the final verdict was spoken, it hit the family like a physical blow. Ami broke down instantly, the kids stood frozen in disbelief, and the entire house felt hollow as if the air itself had been pulled out. In that single moment, the man who had led them through every storm was suddenly gone, and the mountain that once felt like home now felt unbearably silent. In the hours after Billy's passing, the shock inside the Brown household was quickly met with a wave of formal procedures that only added to the confusion. Because his death was sudden and happened far from a hospital, authorities were required to step in and document every detail: who was present, what happened, and whether any prior medical issues were involved. Officers moved through the property quietly, asking difficult questions while the family was still in tears, trying to understand how the mourning had spiraled so quickly. Rumors began to spread online almost immediately, with early reports mixing facts, guesses, and outright misinformation, leaving fans unsure of what was real. Even within the family, there were moments of uncertainty as they replayed the events, wondering if they had missed something or if there was anything they could have done differently. The combination of grief, official interviews, and sudden public speculation turned an already devastating day into an overwhelming blur, one that left the Browns struggling to make sense of what had just happened and why it all felt so unreal. Just when the family thought the worst was behind them, A new blow hit one they never expected to face while still mourning. Only weeks after Billy was laid to rest, legal papers surfaced accusing him of breaching a financial agreement tied to land on the mountain. The claim came from a man who insisted Billy owed him a portion of profits from property deals, and even though Billy was no longer alive, the lawsuit targeted his estate and, by extension, his wife and children. For a family already coping with shock, the timing felt brutal. They were forced into legal talks while still trying to process the loss of their father, answering questions about contracts and negotiations that suddenly mattered more than their grief. The case dragged their private pain back into the public eye, igniting speculation and criticism online from people who didn't know the details but were quick to judge. Instead of being allowed to mourn in peace, the Browns found themselves defending Billy's name, trying to navigate a legal battle he never lived to see, all while adjusting to a life forever changed. For Ami, Billy's death wasn't just the loss of a husband, it was the collapse of the one constant that had carried her through every battle she had ever faced. She had already survived a life-threatening illness, uprooted her family for treatment, and endured years of uncertainty, all with Billy by her side pushing her to keep fighting. Losing him so suddenly left her without the person who had always been her anchor. Friends say she moved through the days after his passing in a quiet haze, barely speaking, spending long hours alone on the porch where she and Billy used to sit together. The mountain, once a symbol of freedom and strength, now felt unbearably empty. On top of her grief, she had to shoulder the legal issues, the property decisions, and the responsibility of holding the family together while she herself was still struggling to breathe through the heartbreak. Every room reminded her of him. Every routine felt incomplete. And while the world watched the family's public updates, no one truly understood how deeply the loss hit Ami, how it shattered the life she'd built and forced her to face a future she never imagined living without him. Billy's passing didn't just break the family's heart, it reshaped their entire world in ways none of them were prepared for. Without the steady presence that had guided them through every move, every hardship, and every chapter of their off-grid life, the siblings began drifting into separate paths, each coping in their own way. Some threw themselves into work, others leaned into silence, and a few wrestled with the growing pressure of carrying on the lifestyle Billy had insisted on preserving. The once unified front the world saw on television now carried quiet fractures that weren't visible in public updates. The show's tone changed, plans shifted, and the family struggled to maintain the same rhythm that had defined their lives for years. Even simple traditions felt different without him. Holidays, meals, and everyday routines carried an emptiness that couldn't be filled. Billy had been the force that kept them anchored, and without him, the family's identity felt shaken, leaving them to rebuild not just their home, but the bond that held them together. Even now, long after that tragic morning, one question still lingers over the Brown family and every fan who followed their journey. Could anything have changed the outcome? It's a thought that sits quietly in the background of every memory, every episode, and every moment they share about Billy. He lived life by his own rules, refusing to step away from the mountain he loved, even as his body begged him to slow down. And that choice leaves a mystery the family will carry forever, whether staying in that remote, rugged world protected him or ultimately placed him beyond the reach of help when he needed it most. What happened in those final moments will always be a painful chapter, but it also stands as a reminder of how fragile life can be, even for someone who seemed unbreakable. If you've watched until the end, tell us what you think. Could anything have changed what happened that night, or was this the ending Billy was always heading toward? Share your thoughts below, and if you want more stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay connected for the next video.